Welcome back to Not Enough Projects. Today we are back on another Miata project. We're wanting to take the Miatas to a track day, but you have to have a roll bar that meets certain specifications, which obviously we do not have. Kind of the de facto Miata standard, which if you're watching this video you probably know, is the Hard Dog line of roll bars. They're really good roll bars, they're just crazy expensive. I think it's like, after freight shipping, almost $1,000 per roll bar. So, being the cheapskate that I am, I found a Summit Racing kit that comes with a pre-bent main loop for $250 plus like $100 in freight. So 2 roll bars for under $1,000. The kit comes as a weld-in roll bar that goes all the way to the floor, that you weld into the floor behind the seat. That limits the seat travel by a lot, so for a short person like me it's not a huge deal, but if you're taller it limits it. So what I'm thinking is we'll do a Hard Dog clone, or a Hard Dog tribute, we'll say, that bolts in right where the seatbelt rail goes, right there. So we'll have a bracket that goes here, and then the rear supports go down into the well in the rear shelf. So we're kind of just winging this. We have 2 to build, so I think we'll kind of just do a quick outline on the first build, cover a little bit of the development process, I guess you would say, and then we'll do a complete step-by-step, measurement-by-measurement build on the second one so that you can hopefully build a cheap roll bar. So yeah, let's start digging in. Alright, so the first thing we're gonna have to do is remove all the stuff that's on top of the rear shelf, along with all the trim for the seatbelt and the door. So we got a 10mm bolt here that I've already taken out, and then a Phillips head screw here. And we're actually gonna need to pull this weather stripping all the way back so that this whole thing can come out. We'll pop the cover for the seatbelt bolt. So it's held on with a big 16mm bolt. And it's got a big stack of washers and stuff. So you can see you got the spacer, a small washer, and then a thick washer. Another 10mm. Go ahead and pull the seatbelt guide up, and then it's got the slot so the seatbelt can actually slide out when we remove the plastic trim. Should just unclip. Which is worryingly sounds like braking. Because it was braking. Alright, so the Hard Dog also bolts in to this lower seatbelt rail bolt that's also a 16mm. We're going to also do a tribute of that mounting system. So the plan is that the plate will bolt in here, have a section that goes down against this face, and then also in the rear have a part that comes up, and then the seatbelt rail bolt will go through both the roll bar mounting frame and the seatbelt rail. Looks like it's retained in the reel. Let's just yank it out all the way. So you can see we got a retaining net there. We'll just pull this out for now and set it down. Alright, so we're gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. And then let's also, before we do that, pull our shelf carpeting out. The top partially up. This is already loose from when we never clipped it back in after doing the top. So if you have this still retained like from the factory, all these holes just have a little plastic clip. So it'll look like this, where you pull the center out, and then the center retracts and allows these fingers to go in, and then you can pull the whole clip out. Alright, so these clips here on the rear carpet are need to pop out. Probably do these just by hand, we'll see. Yep. You just want to make sure you got your finger behind the plastic, or else it can tear through the carpet. So now we can get to all of our bolts that hold this shield on over the rear shelf. So we're just gonna undo all of these bolts and then the whole thing should come out. Okay, so you can see that revealed this well to us, I guess you would call it. This is where we're gonna mount the rear supports. So you can see we're gonna have to do kind of a tight tuck, since this is a glass window, into here, and then the plate, we'll remove this carefully. So we're gonna have to do kind of a tight tuck, and then we'll have a mounting plate here, and that's where we're gonna drill our holes. So I mean, honestly, I think we might just leave it like this and weld a couple supports back and call her good. No, but really this is so tall because it's supposed to go behind the seat and mount into the floor right about there. But like I was saying, the seat has another like 4 clicks that it can go back. So it really limits the amount of seat travel. Plus, I don't think the floor is that rigid down there, so that would be a limitation. Luckily for us though, all we need to do is cut this shorter. You can see it's already about the right width to fit inside of where it needs to go. It's a little bit tight, but what we'll do is we're gonna weld in a horizontal support right about here across to the other one, and we'll measure exactly how wide we want it to be. We'll cut the horizontal to be that length, and then we'll use a come along or something to hold this in until we tack the horizontal one, and then it should be the perfect width. So I think the first step is gonna be measuring what kind of clearance we have from this point up to the top when the top is up, and that's gonna determine how much we cut off of the main hoop here. Usually on something like this where you're working with metal, it's not a huge deal if you go a little far because you can obviously add metal back, but on a roll bar, they get a little weird when you start welding pipe back together. So, I mean, I don't care, but I think the tech guys do. So we're gonna wanna make sure we actually measure a couple times before we cut, which is usually not what we do, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so here is what actually got delivered to us. You can see we got the main hoop, which is the real big ticket item. We've got these 4 mounting plates, which they intend to go under the floor and get welded around. Not what we're gonna be using these for, but it's good material. And then we've got the 3 straight pieces that are, I don't know, each 5 feet long. So that should be more than enough tubing for us. We should actually have some left over. The whole kit's $250 from Summit, plus I think it's like 150 bucks for freight. So overall, pretty good deal just for material. And then adding in the bend. I mean, obviously you got a tubing bender that you know how to use. You might as well just do it yourself, but you can also see the tubing thickness is plenty thick. It definitely meets the minimum spec. I believe it's 1/8 of an inch thick. So that should be good for any regulating body that I know of. All right, so top's up, obviously. Now we're gonna measure from our mounting point. Will be here. Rooster. And then we're gonna go straight up. So it looks like 22 inches until that hoop there, that bow. So we're gonna have to count for the plate thickness also of our mounting plate. So maybe we'll target about 21 inches. Also, we're gonna wanna put the seat back to where it's gonna be. And we gotta make sure it's not gonna be too low for the seat. So 21 inches, that should be perfect. All right, so I forgot to count for the part that it kicks in, so that actually gives us a little bit more vertical clearance. So from the shelf to the top bow in the middle of the shelf is 24 inches. So that means this section to wherever it's mounted can't be more than 24 inches long. Now to get there, if this were just a 90-degree bend, we would have to go a couple inches lower, but as this kicks in, we should be able to use the full height, which will give us more clearance with headroom. So obviously we're going to cut long here. Maybe we'll cut to 25 inches after I double check the measurements, and then we will test fit it. It's going to be like here-ish. All right, so we're ready to mark. So from the center of the shelf to the top is 26 inches, and that's including extra. So we're gonna be cutting down from that, but just a test fit. So I'm just gonna measure with one of these tubes up top so that we can ignore this bend. We'll measure 26 inches down. And we'll give her just a little extra too. Well, I don't know. We'll give a 1/2 inch extra. And then these should be the same. We're just gonna double check, and then what we'll do is we'll take the cutoff from this side and line it up with the other side so that we can make sure we're not cutting more off of one end than the other, provided it's the same length. 39 1/8. Okay, so this is an abrasive miter saw, or cutoff saw, I guess you'd say. This is from Harbor Freight. It's like a little over $100. You can get, they've got like a $40 one. I don't know how well it works, but this should help us keep our cuts square. You could do it with an angle grinder easy, but we're gonna try with this. So. So you can see that beats an angle grinder all day, but I mean, you can do it. I've done plenty of stuff with angle grinders. You can see we're still way tall, but this will give us a jumping off point. So just marking off of our cutoff will get us close enough. I mean, we're not building a spaceship here, so it's okay if it's 1/8 of an inch or a 16th off or whatever. Okay, there we go. Put in the car. Alright, so like I mentioned before, the bar is just like a hair wide, just from relaxing after they bent it. So I've got the come along on here with just, you know, a decent amount of tension. So it just fits. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure from the center of the shelf up and see where we're at. We're pretty much dead on at 27. So the top's not even gonna close. So we'll need to take another, I'll remeasure, but we gotta take 1.5 inches or whatever off before it'll even close. So another thing is this hoop bend isn't ideal. Ideally, this would be a little bit tighter bend and this would be a little bit less of a bend, so that this edge of the tube would be hugging the wall there. Right now, as it is, it's in front of the bolt hole. But what we're gonna do is we'll kick this out till it's even with this edge, and then we should have just enough room to get a wrench in there with the seatbelt bolt. Anyways, it'll make more sense as we go on, but we should be okay. All right, so we got it at the right length. You see, this is going to close without hitting. We probably took off maybe a 1/2 inch more than we needed to, so that would be ideal. At the end, we'll hopefully have the ideal measurements because we still got a whole nother one to do. Another thing we did is we got the come along and we did a bend, basically. We just put a bunch of tension between here, and now this slides out tight. It does slide in and out by hand, so that's gonna help reassembly. So I think now what we're gonna do is fabricate the mounting plates. So we'll take the plates that the kit came with, and I think they actually gave us enough where we're not gonna need to use any other material. And then we'll just cut a strip for here. We'll cut a strip down here, and we'll cut a strip for back there. Weld them all together, which isn't ideal. Ideal would be bend them, but I don't have a brake that could do that thick a material. Yeah, so let's start fabbing this mount. All right, so I like to take everything and design it in CAD, cardboard aided design. So we're just gonna figure out exactly what width we want. So we'll probably go maybe, let's see, is that about as wide as we want to go? Maybe a little bit wider. And we want to make sure we're not going to hit anything down here. We'll put our bolt holes along this face. And then we just want to catch the seat bolt, which is just behind the pipe there. Tube, sorry. So we're going to shoot for this width. This is the Lay's sponsored CAD program. That should do it. Okay, so here's our CAD model. We're going to cut each of these out individually. And then I think we'll lay them in the car and then tack in place, put some good tacks on there, and then we'll weld them solid outside of the car. So we'll just transfer this into the metal. Looks like actually the plate is the perfect width. So we'll just mark each of our bend points, and then that'll give us a separate plate. All right, we got all our pieces cut, test fit, and they seem fine, so we're gonna clean up really good and then we can tack them in the car. All right, so we'll just lay these in as they will sit. Okay, so then we'll just tack those two plates together, which actually we need to go down a bunch. There we go. All right, so get a tack on those, and then, oops, sorry, this one, we'll go like so. Actually, we'll go like that so that we're parallel with the face that we're gonna bolt to. All right, well, they're set up for 1/8 inch, which is what that is. We got this wet blanket here to hopefully stop any fires, and we have just enough electrode length. And we'll get this plate. Gonna be a little bit of a gap just because of, well, because somebody did a really good fit up. Okay. Now that should be able to come out in one piece, hopefully. Now we will weld it solid, I guess. Crocs are not the best welding shoes. Also, short sleeves. Okay, that probably warped it super bad, but hopefully it'll be good enough. Alright, now we're just gonna test fit our creation. Good enough. We could grind all these welds smooth if we really wanted to, but we're gonna leave it. Actually, the convex portion of the weld actually adds strength too, so cool. Now we will do the other side, and then we're ready to tack the main hoop to the mounts. All right, so we have the main hoop tacked onto our mounting plates. Now you may notice there's really not much clearance for the seatbelt bolt. What I'm thinking is we're actually just gonna drill cut a slot in this plate, because really all that bolt does is keep it from coming up, because obviously it can't go down. So it won't matter if there's a slot there. And then we'll start the bolt outside of the car in the slot. And as we put it in, we should be able to slot it into the hole and not have any problems. Fingers crossed. That's why we're just tacking. So I think we're gonna call it for tonight, and then we'll hit it again another day and get the supports welded on. All right, so it's a new day. We got our hoop all good to go and the brackets set up. So now we're ready to go ahead and put our rear braces in. So we're gonna go from, I think we'll have to go from right here-ish, and we'll just go straight down in line back as far as we can here without interfering with our top. So let's get a measuring tape and get an idea of how long our piece needs to be. So if we imagine we're measuring on the edge of the pipe, because the pipe will be flush here, we're looking at 2 feet, and then obviously we're gonna need to cut an angle down where it mates to the body, and then we're gonna have to notch up here. So actually it looks like it's more like 25 inches is what we need to cut it at. Okay, so obviously we are way long, which is how we want it to be. So we got to figure out exactly where it's going to meet the main hoop here, because we're going to have to notch on an angle, because you see we're just getting into the bend. And I think it's just going to be kind of guesstimating the angle, because I'm not smart enough to figure out how to calculate that. Alright, so we got the notcher going. This is a 30-degree notch, because we're coming onto the main hoop at an angle, like on a bend. So we need it to go hug that, and this needs to be at a 90-degree relative to the straight part. So we're pretty close. I'm going to take a degree out, but I think we're ready to go ahead and do it for real on our actual piece. So we'll cut that, and then we will measure from here down to where the plate's gonna go, and then we'll cut our angle and final length. This is just the cheapest Harbor Freight notcher you can get, and I was not expecting much, but honestly, for the price, I really can't complain. It cuts straight, and it makes decent notches, so. So we'll position the tube about halfway in the diameter of the hole saw. Oops, sorry. That should give us a cut without sacrificing too much length. So we'll make sure this is cranked down real good. And get our lube ready to go. All right, so one annoyance I've kind of run into is with the 1 5/8 hole saw that we have being not super deep, we're actually bottoming out the hole saw onto the tube. So once we're through the max it'll go, we got to kind of work this piece off so that we can get more depth out of it. But that's not even the notcher's fault, that's the hole saw. Okay, so there it is. Let's go test fit it on the main hoop. So we're probably still way too long to be able to get it on there. Actually, not far off. Not far off at all. which is a problem because we still got to cut our angle in. So we may actually be redoing this. So we still got a big gap there, so it actually needs. Alright, so using a little bit of math, we can figure out what angle we got to cut on the bottom of the rear support. So we measure the angle that the main hoop makes with the ground gravity, which actually we got dead on 0, so it's perpendicular to the ground, and then we measure the angle that this makes with the main hoop, like that, which is 26.5 degrees. And then since all the angles in triangle add up to 180, we can determine the missing angle, which is 63.5 degrees, or 64-ish, 65-ish degrees. So that's what we got to cut the lower portion of our support to. Yeah, we're a little short. I mean, actually, it'd be okay if we just... Alright, after a bunch of back and forth testing angles and messing stuff up, basically, we are ready to go ahead and tack this first support. So we're as far back as we can go. And this plate drilled 4 holes in it for our mounting bolts. It needs to scoot over a little bit, obviously. So let's do it. Now we have our one side tacked. It's starting to look like a roll bar. So I think we got most of the hard part done. We figured out most of our measurements and stuff. So we just need to do the exact same thing on the other side. And then we got one diagonal to do. Welder's solid. And we're good to go. All right, so we're just about fully tacked up now. We did the other rear support, obviously. It's just the same deal. There's one hang up we had to notch out around a wiring harness bulkhead. We'll go over all this in detail. And then we did the center supports, the diagonals. A little bit of math there we had to do to calculate all the angles, but luckily we got it all working out okay. So now I think we're ready to actually pull this thing out and weld it solid. So let's do it. All right, so we got the roll bar fully welded. We're gonna need to grind some of these down, but we got it in the NB and it fits perfect. I have a big plastic window, the cheapest eBay top. You can check out that video if you want on this car. It's been, let's see, almost a year. It's been through hard winter and all that stuff, and still perfect. We've got tons of clearance with the roll bar. The NB actually has a little bit more forgiveness with the roll bar, it looks like. There's a little bit more clearance everywhere, basically. But it's pretty much the same as the NA. So we'll take the roll bar back out and make another one in the NA. The only difference that we're going to make is we have probably 1.5 inches, maybe almost 2 inches of height that we could have added to the roll bar, which is totally fine for me, but I'm short. So on the other one, we're going to raise it up another 1.5 inches or so. All right, so now that we have a roll bar made, I went ahead and compiled all the measurements, and this one was just made by fitting and checking, which is honestly, if you're doing one of these, probably how you should do it also. But just as a starting point, here is the world's worst drafting of a roll bar. So we have 25 inches from the bottom of the main hoop up to the top, measured across the top of the main hoop. So that dimension is 25 inches. The rear diagonal braces come 15 inches from the center point this way, and 15 inches from the top of the rear support down. So it's an isosceles triangle. So there's a 45-degree angle there and there. You can notch it just like a 45. And then from the side view, you can see the rear support goes at about a 28-degree angle. But again, the best practice would be to just measure it in the car, because you're having to make sure there's clearance against the deck lid support structure. And then the mounting plates for the rear, you can see on this, they're just 3x6, so it's 3 inches in this dimension and 6 inches in that dimension. On the passenger side, I had to notch because there's a wire harness bulkhead there. But on the driver's side, it's just a straight rectangle plate. And the holes, it really doesn't matter where they go as long as you got them close enough in from the edge of the plate and you got clearance for the bolt heads. And then these, so these I started with just the 6-inch plate stock that the kit comes with, and I used 3.5 inches wide. It is about as wide as you can go. And then I used the whole length, so the first section about 2.5 inches, and then I cut. The next section is about 2 inches, and then I cut. And then the last section is about 1.5 inches or so. And then I just tacked them up in the car. You saw how that worked. One other thing, if you're starting with this kit, is that the main hoop is tight. It's bowed out a little bit compared to how it'll fit in the car. It seemed like the NB had a little bit more clearance in that area than the NA, but what we had to do is actually get a come along and strap it from here over to the other side on the main hoop and kind of bend it in. So the dimension here from inside to inside is about 45 inches or so. Just a hair under 45 inches up top, and at the bottom, because it's at an angle, which isn't ideal, it's a little under 44 inches. Compared that, here's the raw main hoop. So you can see from the factory, or whatever you call it, it's about 46 inches, maybe even a hair over 46 inches. And if you go down, it's still straight, obviously. So we have to pull this in because it's a little tight in the car. So let's start going through the process step by step and get the last roll bar made. So this is the sketchiest part for sure. What you gotta do, it's what you gotta do to make it fit. So go ahead. You gotta bend it in quite a bit. One more click. Okay. So now we're gonna see if we went far enough. Alright, so we're getting 1 inch to go. Okay, there we go. We're 1 inch past where we need to be, so hopefully it doesn't spring back too much. Oh, it basically didn't do anything. So I'm going a couple inches past. Alright, you gotta go another 1/4 inch or so. Okay, so we're pretty much exactly where we are on the other one, which is just about 45. So you have to bend it an uncomfortable amount, but that's because it just springs back. So now we can cut this down to length. Alright, so now to measure the overall length in spite of the bend, we'll lay one of our straight piece of tubing stock down, just like that. And then we'll measure from here a little bit extra. 25/8. Alright, now we'll just use our cutoff saw at a 90-degree angle and cut it right on the mark. Alright, so here's our main hoop. Now we'll test fit it in the car. Without the plate, of course, but okay, so looks like we got it bent just enough that it's snug in there, but we're not having to force it in, so that's good. Now we'll just put the top up and make sure we got clearance. So it looks like we were actually just barely rubbing here, and we're a little tight to the bow on the top, so let's fold it back down and watch. So you can see it rubbing there. So we need to take probably another ½ inch off, unfortunately. Maybe a quarter to start with. And now we'll just retest fit, and we'll do it again if we don't have clearance. We'll want to make sure we have our desired clearance plus 1/8 of an inch, because the plate is going to be 1/8 of an inch thick. You got clearance?
Yep.
There's play in this, so it like just hits, but I think it's fine. All right, so I went ahead and just threw a couple scrap plates under the contact points for the main hoop, so that gets us our true clearance, and we have like just enough, so we nailed it there. This actually rubs just a tiny bit, but it's got a 1/8 of an inch of play, so it's no big deal. It's not like it's hitting, it's just touching as it goes up. But with the top latched, there's no problem. So this is going to be just about the max height that we can get out of it. So yeah, let's move on to making our main hoop mounts. All right, so this is the cutoff from one of the mounts that we made for the first bar, but it's got the marks in the right place. So we're gonna measure 3.5 inches. Then this is a cutoff from the first roll bar, so we'll use it as a template. We'll cut it on the chop saw, although you could do it with angle grinder. All right, so now we have all of our pieces cut out. I'm gonna clean them up with a flap disc, make sure we get all the mill scale off, and then we'll be ready to fit it up and tack them in place. All right, so now we're ready to actually make the main hoop mounts. So we need to square up the main hoop with the car, so we want this at 90 degrees. We've got an angle finder here. The car's tilted a little bit, so that's 90 degrees. And also, we're just maxing out the adjustment here, making the end of this even with here. Now, one unfortunate limitation, I guess you could say, of this, unless you made a different mount that moved the hoop forward more, I don't want to do that because head clearance, but the limitation is that you have the seatbelt bolt right here. So you can see that the bar gets in the way of the hole, so you can't actually just thread the hole or the bolt through. So what we have to do is make this mount have a slot, and then this can fall into the slot and then go into the hole. It'll make more sense when we assemble it, but that's what we have to do with the hoop design on this. Not a huge deal, but because of that, we got to make sure we're maximizing our forward space, so we're lining it up with there, and we had good results on the last one, so that's what we'll be doing here. All right, so now we're ready to assemble. We have these pieces, so we'll start with the piece that the hoop sits on, which is the medium piece out of the three. And then we'll kind of fit it to how it's going to go. Got a bit of elastic on the car that's hanging us up. There we go. Make sure everything else kind of fits together. The bar obviously needs to scoot forward again, but okay, so there we go. We're fit up. Now, just by nature of how it's cut, there's a gap on this piece, which isn't a big deal. We'll actually make sure we'll get full penetration. But we want this to be flat with this surface here, because that's where we're bolting to. So we'll hold it flat to that as we tack. Yeah. So we'll just tack the plates positioning, and then we'll tack the hoop onto the plates. So this rear plate, I have sitting up on top of the middle plate, just to give it a little extra height. But other than that, nothing special. a little windy out, so we got crappy gas coverage, but just needed to hold it in place. All right, now I'm gonna weld these solid. We'll grind down the weld here so that we can put the main hoop right on top, and then we'll tack the hoop on. All right, so here is our welded plate. The weld on this face I ground down because the tubing is gonna be right on the edge there, so we don't want a bead poking up. And then also this bead got ground off so that it can sit flush. Okay, now we will make sure that our mounting plate is seated all the way where it needs to be. So I'm gonna make sure we're playing with that. You see it's not rocking on the surface that we're gonna bolt onto, and then the back is pretty much flush. So now we'll just make sure our hoop is all the way at the very front of the plate. Also, just double check that we got clearance for the head of the bolt, which you do. And now we will tack. All right, we're fully tacked now. Well, we're tacked enough. We'll pull this out, put a couple tacks on the rear where you can't get the gun into, and then we'll move on to getting our rear supports in. All right, so now that the hoop's done, we're ready to go ahead and get our rear supports made and tacked up. So we'll start with the mounts. They're just simple rectangles, except for the passenger side, we got a notch to clear this pass through right there. All right, so we're basically just cutting a 3x6 plate. So the plates that come with the kit are 6x6, so we just cut it in half. All right, so I'm just gonna use the one we already made as a template. Get the measurements in just a second. This is the side, obviously, that we got a notch. Basically, out of one corner, we're taking 1.5 by 1.5 square off. And then you just offset the bolts about 3/4 of an inch down. And they're all about 3/4 inch inside. Not super critical on the placement here. We got a lot of open space in the car. Okay, so now we're just gonna drill 3/8 holes at each of these places. All right, so now just notch this one with an angle grinder. All right, here's our plates. Got them cleaned up to weld. They're still got a little bit of oil on them, so we'll wipe them up with alcohol or lacquer thinner or whatever. Let's set these down where they're gonna go, and then we can start measuring and cutting for our rear braces. All right, so here's how this panel we made just fit. So that's perfect. The NB actually does not have that, so you got a little bit more room to play. But yeah, we're good there. So now we're gonna take a measurement of the rear support off the other roll bar, and you know there's minor variations and everything, so we'll give ourselves a little bit extra. We'll cut our notch and angle, and then we'll just keep shortening until it's perfect fit. So it looks like at the longest point, these are both about 25.5 inches. So let's cut two 27-inch pieces and go from there. All right, so we'll start off by notching this. It's kind of weird because it's on this bend right here, and it's on an angle to the bend. So I'm not smart enough to figure that math. So we're gonna, I think the last one we guesstimated around 30, and it was pretty close. Maybe a little bit too much angle, so we'll target like 25-ish, and then we'll just clean it up with the angle grinder to make it match. All right, so we got the notcher set up to 25 degrees, and I found if you target about halfway, so that point is halfway through the hole saw, that gives you a pretty good cut. You can notch tubes without a notcher. It's just tedious because you gotta actually angle grind out by hand. There's ways to do it and do it really well, but this was like $55 at Harbor Freight. So, and since it's an 1 5/8 tube, we're using an 1 5/8 hole saw. All right, so there's our notch. The Harbor Freight notcher isn't dialed in perfect, so it leaves a little bit because the tube isn't quite centered in the hole saw, but good enough for who it's for. And then we'll clean all that up with a flat disc before final fit. Let's go test it in the car. All right, so test fitting looks pretty good. It's hard to tell because it's so long. So now we'll set the main hoop back in and measure the length from this point on the hoop down, and that'll give us how far we're gonna cut this down. All right, so I measured off the roll bar we already made, and the length is pretty much exactly 25, maybe a hair over. So right now we'll cut to 25 1/4, give us a little bit of wiggle room, and we're gonna cut the end at 28-ish degrees. It's, you know, it's not exact. There's always a little bit of slop, so, but that's where the old one sat. So let's turn the table to that. Okay, so then another big thing is we gotta make sure we cut the angle at the right point on the pipe tube. So this is the outside of the hoop, so we need the angle to be cut like this. So basically we're cutting 90 degrees from this point. So on this edge, it looks like all my Sharpie marks disappeared, which is awesome, but we're cutting on this edge and we'll cut like that. And that measurement to the long edge. So that should put us right about there. There we go. And so that pretty much got us perfect. You want a little bit of clearance between this structure. Okay. All right, so we're pretty much dead on with our measurement. It gives us as far back as we can go. You can see we're hitting the top, but it's just touching. This is a glass top. Plastic top windows have a lot more clearance, so you can even go farther, but this is what we're doing, and that's what our measurements will be for. The main thing with this is that this can be tilted like this. Obviously that's exaggerating, but I haven't found a really good way to square that off except by eye, and honestly it's like as long as it's close enough, it's fine. I tried checking the angle with an angle finder, and if you could go vertical off this face, it would tell us if it was plumb, but it's really finicky and it doesn't really give a good result. So by eye is the way to go, in my opinion. So as long as you've got clearance to the top, you got clearance to the structure, and the notch is flush with the pipe, you're good to go. So I'm gonna mark where on this it sits, so that we can clean this up and put it back in, and we're going to do the exact same thing for the other side. So this side's not fitting quite. Should I do that? Alright, so we have verified that both fit in proper, and what we were mainly checking is the angle that it was sitting at. So the angle finder's nice here. We can just lay it right across this, and because of the inch taller main hoop, we actually ended up at about 26 degrees instead of 28. So if you think about it, taller hoop brings us up, so it's gonna be a sharper angle, so it makes sense we lost a couple degrees. So I marked exactly where it sits on here, so we're gonna clean up all the way around our notch. You can see it's a little jagged, and we gotta clean it for welding. We'll clean down here, and then we're ready to tack. All right, so everything's cleaned up. We got all the weld surfaces nice and shiny, so now we're gonna go ahead and tack. I marked exactly where we need to be. It's not quite there because I gotta hold it while I tack, but we'll tack one and then make sure the other one is straight relative to the other and get them both tacked. Alright, our rear braces are tacked up both to the main hoop and to the mounting plates. So now we're ready to do our diagonals. So to make it a simple measurement and simple angle for the notching. We want to make an isosceles triangle. So distance from here to here is equal to distance from here to here. Now on the previous roll bar, we hit 15 and a half, I think it was. So we went from here 15 and a half and here 15 and a half. And that was the max that would give us clearance with the top. We should be fine to just do it like that. So I'll verify the measurement with the previous one, and I think we're just fine to go with the 15 and a half, given I'm remembering right. So let's cut those out and get them notched. We're also gonna measure our center here. So it looks like we got 33 inches. Maybe a hair under, let's see. Yeah. So our center line is gonna be 16 3/8 from one of our posts. All right, so given that it's an isosceles triangle, we just want to find where our hypotenuse is, which is the cross brace. And we know our angle, so you solve the triangle, and we get about 21 and a half-ish inches, which, you know, we got slop, so it's no big deal. So we're gonna cut to say 23 inches, and then we'll notch on both sides, and that should get us to our final measurement. Okay, so I got the notcher set to 45 degrees. Now we'll just notch it. So, and really to notch, you only need to start here. I just like to go a little farther because it seems to do better, but we can use that to our advantage. We can measure the exact distance, so we can measure from the longest saddle, if you want to call that, down to 20 or down to 15 and a half or 15 and a quarter, whatever it is, or 22 and a half or whatever it is. And then we can mark and notch right there. So we will be using that to our advantage. Plus, you don't have to cut through as much material. So another thing we're going to want to do, because we have two notches, we need to make sure they're clocked the same. So structural tubing, or really any pipe, has a mark where it was rolled or formed into a tube. So line that up with the center of our clamp, and that should get us pretty dang close. All right, so we just measured exactly like how I said. Notched the first end, we measured from the outside edge and then to our desired length, which was 15 and a half or whatever, and then or 22 and a half or whatever, and then we notched exactly there. So really the best way to do it is to notch one end, put this down to where you have top clearance, because it'll actually hit the glass if you go too low, and then figure out exactly where that is, measure from here to there, and notch accordingly. Now we'll make another one. We can pop this out, tack it, and then really we're ready to weld this solid. All right, so we have both diagonals notched. They're exactly the same length, so that's good. Now we just clean everything up and tack it, and we can do it outside the car to minimize splatter. All right, so we got both roll bars fully welded. I went ahead and marked our bolt holes for the front mounts, so we'll drill those out, and then also the notches on that front mount, so we'll cut that notch out. Just lined it up with the lower seatbelt bolt, so cut those out. All right, so we have our first bar drilled and notched for the lower mount. Now we are just gonna repeat the exact same thing on the other bar, and then we're ready to send it out to get coated. All right, so we got our roll bars back from powder coating. Very happy with how they came out. They look awesome. Just don't look too close to the welds. They're not that bad, but definitely not pro level aesthetics. Penetration's fine though, so I'm not worried about that. Powder coating was only 75 per on these roll bars, which in my opinion is super cheap. So if you have someone in your area that is cheap powder coating, definitely not even worth trying to paint it, because you'd spend way more time trying to get a good prep for paint than you would just paint to get it powder coated. So now we're ready to just go ahead and get it installed. We're gonna have to drill some holes and also fab up some backing plates to stiffen up the mounting point for the roll bar. In order to get at the back side of the bolts, we got to take the wheel off, and then we got to remove this cover. So it's held on with just these clips that you screw the center out of, and then the whole thing will pop out, supposedly. Sometimes they don't really work very well. Okay. These stupid things. See, this one got all crusted up with like gravel road debris, so it wouldn't turn. But you can get them at any auto parts store, so it's not a huge deal to replace them. So now we can see our mounting points. So we're gonna build, so the seatbelt rail portion is gonna be mounting here. See, we have a good undercoating on this. And then the rear mount, you can see the rubber plug up here, and we're mounting just in front of it. So that's where we're gonna be drilling the holes. Let's take the other side off. All right, so now we have access on the passenger side. So the one thing on the NB is we have to pull this evap vent down. This clips up, and then the vents are on the side here. But we're gonna be bolting right over it. So we wanna hang it down for now, and then we'll zip tie it out of the way when we're done. All right, so before we put the roll bar in for the last time, well, hopefully for the last time, we need to make our rear backing plates. This basically just keeps it from, in the event of a rollover, pulling the bolts through the thin sheet metal of the body. So it's just a reinforcement. After making all of the mounts, I don't think the roll bar kit has quite enough 1/8 inch plate to make these. So I picked up just some more 1/8 inch flat stock. This is a 3 inch by 3 foot or something. So all we're gonna do is we're just gonna basically match this face and this face. And we'll just mark the holes, drill, and then they should be in the right positions for the bolts. Let's chop that off. All right, so we got all of our backing plates cut. Now we're just gonna lay them up against their respective side and mark our holes that we need to drill. All right, so now we'll need to see if our bolt holes actually line up. Looks like we're gonna have to wall them out a little bit. That's okay. That one does not line up, so. So this probably looks a little weird, but one last thing we need to do before putting the roll bar in is we're gonna take a little bit off of the bottom of this, because right now it's basically going to the bottom of the shelf. We need to take about 1/8 of an inch off so that we have plenty of clearance for our roll bar. Otherwise, we're gonna be fighting a lot. So, yes. Also, we can take the bolt out. We're not gonna be using this spacer or the washer on this side. So, we'll take the little retaining clip out. All right, so we are ready to drill our holes. Unfortunately, I'm an idiot, and these two inboard holes, they're too far inboard. They're actually on a pinch weld, which obviously you don't want to drill out. So for now, we're just gonna drill those two holes and put bolts in, and we can add another 2 bolts, you know, a little bit farther inboard, like here and back. But yeah, this is just a hair too far. What I should have done is made this plate wider, gone all the way to the wall, and then we would have had enough room for another bolt right here, and that would have been perfect. So if anybody else out there is doing a roll bar, then that's what you want to do, and don't be an idiot like me. Check where the frame rail is. Not a huge deal. Let's get the bolts that we can use drilled. Once it sits down, I think a normal wrench will fit. All right, so I mentioned earlier the seatbelt install is gonna be sketchy on this, just because of the way I had to make it. And I think I explained how you could improve this earlier. But what we're gonna do is we'll slide the bolt in here without a washer. We can't use a washer because of the thickness that we're fighting. And then slide it in to its home, into the slot we made in the roll bar. And then now we can start tightening the bolt in. Now it's so tight because of the way the bracket is bent. I think once we get it in, it won't be so bad. But it's so tight right now that we have to use a cone wrench, like what you use to adjust bike bearing cones. But like I was saying, I think because of the way the bracket's bent, that's why it's happening right now. Once we get it in, I think we'll be okay. And we want the seatbelt on the inside of the bar. So I'm gonna get 1/8 of a turn each time for about 30 minutes, and then we'll be ready to drill our holes. All right, so we're just about tight on this side. The other side needs to tighten up a little bit more. We'll give it a final torque best we can at the end. I just wanted everything to get fully seated so that we can get our holes drilled exactly where they need to be on the rears and on the fronts. So I'll snug down that driver's side and then we'll start drilling holes. All right, so this is a 1-foot-long 3/8 drill bit from Harbor Freight that I'm hoping will give us enough flexibility to be able to drill a hole. Without it, you could maybe do it with a right angle drill adapter, but I don't have a 1/4-inch shank 3/8 drill bit, and I don't know if they make them, so I'm sure they do, but this is easier. So just come in here and drill down. All right, there's one. Number 2 we may need to do with the top up, but all right, now obviously this is bare steel, so I'm gonna give it just a quick spritz with some paint. I'm just gonna put it on wet because it doesn't really matter. So, and then that part will get sandwiched up, and then when we're done, I'll come back and spray it down, all the hardware and everything with paint, just keep it from rusting. I should mention we are using all grade 8 3/8 hardware, using nylocks just to make sure nothing comes loose. You could use normal nuts and probably not have a problem. And we're using 3/8 1.5-inch bolts, which should give us just enough meat. All right, we got our rear bolts tightened. See, we're getting more and more rigid. Now we are ready to drill our front mount holes. These are a lot easier to get to. So I'll probably run the vacuum as we're going just to keep chips out. All right, so looking into the car, this section's actually boxed in, part of the frame. We have to come all the way down past these spot welds. That's the first part that's exposed outside, down here. So what we're gonna have to do is actually extend this bracket down. Again, should have checked that. What are you gonna do? So yeah, we're gonna have to pop the roll bar back out and fix this bracket. All right, so we got the extension welded on. It's kind of on an odd angle, which is why I had to, paint's cracking, why I had to weld and grind a whole bunch, but it is now one plate. I'm confident in the strength. All right, so roll bars in with the extended front mounts. Now we're just gonna bolt the rears first because those holes are drilled. Once those are nice and tight, we'll go ahead and drill our holes for the front mounts. All right, so we are fully tightened down on all of our mounting bolts. You see, it's nice and rigid, and you know, if a good yank doesn't move it, then it's gotta be good for a rollover. So at this point now it's just reassembly. There is some modifications we gotta do to the interior bits. This shelf cover that goes back on, we're gonna have to cut. Not a huge deal. And we're gonna have to cut the plastics around. So we'll start off by getting all of our harnesses clipped back in where they need to go, and then laying the back carpet back down. Okay, so here is the shelf cover. So if we look under here, we can see where our bolt hole is. That's about a little bit outboard of where our tube is. So what we need to do is cut from here all the way down, and we can see this bolt hole here, which is where that one goes. We gotta cut back. Oh no, sorry, this one. So we're gonna have to cut from about here to here. So let's do it. All right, there we go. Easy enough. The reason I had this up is because this connector's a little corroded, so sometimes I have to wiggle it a little bit to just fix it. All right, so we got the shelf cover in. Now this sound deadening, we're gonna need to put a slice on it. So we'll just kind of align it with where it's gonna sit. And we need a slice about there. Let's see if that works. All right, so we got the carpet in. You could spend some more time to make it look a lot nicer. I broke all the clips on these, so I gotta get some more, but simple enough, they just clip in the holes. So now we need to get the side trim pieces on, so let's get them and see where we gotta cut. So it looks like this is about where it sits lengthwise. Looks like we got a snip right here. So maybe we just cut this whole thing off. Yeah, let's start by just cutting this off. I think we're not gonna be able to get away without doing that. So it looks like we gotta trim further. All right, so to clear the bar, we're actually gonna have to cut this whole piece in half. And then probably clearance it just a little bit because the bar sticks right about here. Let's see. So if we cut right here, and then we might need to cut right here, looks like. And then the pieces will just sit in independently. All right, so I'm gonna use the Dremel, and hopefully this will do a clean cut on this plastic. Okay, not too bad. We'll clean up the edge a little bit with sandpaper or something, but let's go see how much more we gotta trim. Okay, so it looks like just a little bit right there. We'll just cut the corner basically. Okay, looks like some more from here. All right, here is our outer piece. Just about clearance. So I went ahead and just hit the edge with sandpaper. You can see it cleans it up nice. Now let's do the rear piece. So we're just about fully seated. That's looking pretty good to me. Let's see if this plastic piece that's on the seatbelt will fit. Answer no. So we'll have to cut that off. All right, so we're just about cut as good as we're gonna get. So now we'll put all the retaining hardware in. For the seatbelt guide, this is the original hole right here. This other hole inboard is threaded on the NB. I think it might not be on the NA, in which case you just have to make a bracket that goes from the original mount point out around over to here so that this doesn't hit the roll bar. But you can see, moving to the inboard hole, all's good. So yeah, I'll just put all the mounting hardware back in on this thing and do the other side, and then I think we're pretty much done. So, all right, so here it is. It's in, fully bolted in. Still got one more to do, which I'm not looking forward to. But this one's in, and it looks good. Bolted in good. I'm happy with how it turned out, especially for the cost. We got 2 roll bars made for well under the cost of 2 off-the-shelf roll bars. Should you build one of these? Maybe, if you have the skills or if you're willing to learn the skills, then it's probably worthwhile. But I would say unless you want a project, it's probably not worth doing, even though it's a fraction of the cost of an off-the-shelf one, because it is a lot of work. And at the end of the day, it's probably not going to be as good as one that you can buy. This one definitely isn't. I would say that it's safe. I would feel fine using it, but I'm not going to claim that it's a good design, the best design, or even really a safe design. But I would say that it's a good deal. The kit that you can get off Summit, it's pretty decent, and for the materials you get, I'd say it's a good cost. So yeah, I'm happy with how it turned out. So hopefully if you're looking to build one of these, this is helpful, or if you're not, maybe it was entertaining. So either way, I will see you guys next time.